Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. What a great turnout. This afternoon's discussion is a presentation of the School of Business Foster Center for Responsible Leadership. The Foster Center is made possible by a generous gift by Daria Foster, honoring her late husband, William C. Foster, class of '62. My name is Michael Gallagher. I'm the director of the Foster Center here on campus. I would also like to thank Dean James for helping to facilitate the many events that the Foster Center is able to bring to our community. At the conclusion of this discussion, there will be a QR code posted on the screen in case you want to check in. Our speaker today is Dr. Andrew Gustafson. Andy is a professor at the Heider School of Business at Creighton University. Dr. Gustafson focuses on business ethics, business and its societal effects, corporate social responsibility, ethical issues in marketing and public policy, as well as unintended, good and bad, externalities of business. He is especially interested in how business can contribute to the common good. In addition to a wide range of published scholarship, Andy has given more than 100 academic or professional presentations at conferences and workshops regionally, nationally, and internationally. He has been invited to give keynotes or talks at a variety of schools, including the Darden School at the University of Virginia, University of Texas at San Antonio, Rockhurst University, Cairn University, Tehran University, and other universities in Iran. In addition to his role at Creighton, Dr. Gustafson has just been named the executive director of the Society for Business Ethics for the term 2022 through 2027. Please help me welcome Dr. Gustafson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Thanks for being in the front row. I really appreciate you guys for coming on up. If there's people that come in late, they can sure come up too. So I just got here from Omaha. I've never been out here to see the Bonnies before. So it's nice to come out and visit you all here. I'm from Creighton, the home of the Blue Jays. So that's where I'm coming from. I grew up on a hog, corn, and cattle farm in the middle of Nebraska. But I did go to school at Fordham in the Bronx for a few years. So I know the East Coast a little bit. But it's good to be out here with you today. What I'm going to talk to you about is about sort of a project I've gotten involved in since I first got to Creighton on the side. And it'll kind of explain itself as I go forward. Just to let you know who I am. So I'm a Christian, first of all. I do teach at a Catholic school. I've gone to Fordham and Marquette for undergrad, and then or for school, and then I went to Creighton for 17 years. I've been at Creighton. So I've been with the Jesuits around there for 23 years, but I am married. I'm not a Jesuit. I'm actually a Protestant. So I'm a Protestant teaching in a Catholic school. So that's part of my background. I'm a farmer's son. I'm a philosopher at heart, but I'm also in the business school. So I teach marketing and management stuff and business ethics. And I'm an entrepreneur. And we'll talk about that a little bit too as we go forward. And also a student of CST. And if you don't know what that means, just Catholic social thought. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward too. These are some of the properties that I own in Omaha and a few in my hometown too. My hometown's about 4,200 people, but I started buying properties when I was in grad school actually, and it just sort of snowballed as I went along. But when I first got to Omaha, I bought a property and then another, and now we own 25 buildings in Omaha. So that's part of what I'm going to tell you about today, but these are just some of them. We call them communion properties. That'll become more clear as we go along why. So what we do is we buy properties, often distressed, and what I mean is they're condemned. So we've bought a lot of properties that were condemned, and we're maybe going to get bulldozed, and we go and we fix them up, and then we make them so they're suitable for housing again. Then we rent them out, and we build relationships with workers, tenants, and the community. We got about 35 buildings, 80 units, over 120 renters. Another way to think about it is I'm responsible for about 110 toilets. I'm also responsible for about 320 sinks. So that's another way to think about that. And I'm the one who gets calls. So if one of my tenants today had a problem, I got a text message about it on my phone when I was on the way here from Omaha. So I'm pretty actively involved. I don't go fix all the toilets, but I've got guys that help me to do that stuff. So this is a problem that comes up a lot, I think, for us, if you're in any way a person of faith, and that is a divided life. So you've got this, you go to church on Sunday, but then what's Monday through Friday like? It might be very different. So the split between faith and business, and that's been a concern for me because I'm a person of faith, and so I want to figure out how do I fix that divide. Oftentimes, we'll talk about how faith might have something to say to business. What does the church say about how you should run your business, this or that? But I've found actually that there's another part of this circle, and that is the way that if you practice your business in a certain sort of way, it actually feeds you spiritually. So it can work both ways. Not only your spiritual concerns maybe affect the way that you do business, but the way that you practice your business can start to feed you spiritually in certain sorts of ways. I'm going to try to help you see how that happened for me. This is a long quote, and I'll try not to have too many of these long quotes. I'm sorry for this. But it is from the Pope, right? So that's kind of cool. But Pope Francis invited us over to talk to him, and he said, "You see, the entrepreneur is an agent of communion. By introducing into the economy the good seed of communion, you begin a profound change in the way of seeing and living business. Business is not only incapable of destroying communion among people, but can edify it, can promote it. With your life, you demonstrate that economy and communion become more beautiful when they're beside each other. Certainly the economy is more beautiful, but communion is also more beautiful because the spiritual communion of hearts is even fuller when it becomes a communion of goods, of talents, of profits." So I don't know what it's like here, but at my school that I'm at now and the schools I've been at before, there's sometimes a difference between arts and science students and their view of business and business students and their view of business. Business students tend to think, why in the world would I get a degree over there when I could make so much money doing this over here? Why are they so silly to do that? And the arts and science students tend to think, why do they sell their souls to the devil just to make money? And so there's this conflict sometimes between arts and science students and business students. And I think the cool thing about this idea about business is business can be used to bring about the common good. And that's kind of what I'm about. So this is Shara Lubick with Pope John Paul II. She is a famous person. During World War II, she was a young girl, and her friends were there, and a lot of buildings were getting bombed in their part of Italy. And she said, we need to help people that are having their houses bombed because our house didn't get bombed. So they were sharing. So there's this sharing community that they began called the Focolari. And so here is a quote from her. "Unlike the consumer economy based on a culture of having, the economy of communion is a communion of giving." So she started this Focolari movement. And then in 1991, she was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I don't know if any of you have been to Brazil before? John has, okay. Well, there's some shanty towns like this in Sao Paulo, and she got there, and she realized a lot of the Focolari that were part of her group were living there in the shanty towns. And she said, well, what are we doing to help our brothers and sisters in the shanty towns? And they said, well, we only have so many resources. We can only share so much. We're running out. We don't have enough to give to them and to help them. And she said, well, what can we do about this? And so they brainstormed on it, and they decided what they were going to do is build businesses, actually create businesses that would provide jobs that people in their community then could have jobs and earn their own money instead of just getting handouts of charity. So that's what they decided to do. And that's what the economy of communion is this group that's kind of an offshoot of the Focolari to try to create jobs through building up just private enterprise businesses. So economy of communion, these are two words contemporary culture keeps separate, often consider opposites. You've instead joined, accepting the invitation that Shara Lubick offered you 25 years ago. She asked entrepreneurs to become agents of communion. With your life, you demonstrate that economy and communion become more beautiful when they're beside each other. So this maybe helps you understand what is different about the way that we do business and other people that are real estate developers. So one thing is we get difficult buildings. Buildings others would just think, oh, that thing's going to probably get torn down. So we take that building and we make it beautiful again. That's what first attracted me to this work, is I saw a building and I thought, wow, that's such a cool old building, but it'd be fun to bring it back to life. So that was one thing, taking sort of what everyone else thinks is a reject and then turning it into something beautiful again. Employees, we take on some employees from the fringes of society. I'll share some of that with you as we go along. But people that otherwise wouldn't have jobs, basically alcoholic, homeless people in many cases, or at least semi-homeless, and other people too that have issues of different sorts. And then tenants, we provide grace to tenants who fall behind. Before COVID, there was plenty of that already. We would take on tenants that other people wouldn't have. There was one time when before I got married in 2011, and I was living in this giant Victorian house that I'd fixed up, and I'll show you a picture in a second. But I was living there with some other guys as my tenants, and then I got a call that this guy needed a place to stay. He was just getting out of prison. He was a sex offender. And so I talked to the guys, is it okay if we have this sex offender come live with us? He's about our age, and so he would be here in the house though. And they said, yeah, I guess it'd be okay. So even we had him come. So I'm a Creighton professor, and now my house that I live in is on the sex offenders list, right? Because if you have a sex offender in that house, that address goes on the sex offenders list. So my house was on the sex offenders list because I had a sex offender living in my house with me when I was living with some other guys. We've rented to other sex offenders too at times. We've rented to people that are just coming out of prison that have a really hard time getting a job. And then we've just had people that we're dealing with people, this might see, I don't know what rents are here, but we still have some apartments that we rent for under $400 a month. So it's a very cheap rent. And we've got people, sometimes we have one woman who lives in one of those apartments, and she's lost her job 3 times in the last 7 years. And every time that happens to her, we say, don't worry, we'll help you get through this until you find your next job. And so we just work with her in that way. We got to do that a lot with people during COVID. We had one girl that fell behind. She was a undocumented worker that was living in one of our places, and she didn't have any money for a whole year. So she got behind by $8,000. We kept waiting with her, and we didn't have restrictions like you do out here. If in Nebraska, if you want to kick someone out, you can. It's a lot more open on that sort of thing. But we didn't. We kept with her, and eventually she was able to catch up through a program that we helped her get in touch with. So with buildings, employees, and tenants, there's a way in my mind thinking about as a Christian, like Jesus took the disciples from the fishermen, like kind of the lower echelon of society. That's where Jesus reached out to and what he used. And so there's a way in which we're trying to redeem houses, people, helping people get through with grace. So we make decisions, business decisions for reasons other than just profit. There have been times when I've actually bought another house because my guys were kind of out of work, and I was like, I need to give them something else to do so they don't just go back and start drinking again. Gratuity and reciprocity, that works both ways. I give grace to them, and then they are usually very loyal back, and there's a lot of reciprocity. So it works both ways. This is important, I think, with business. We often think of business as being transactional. I give you this, you give me this back. That's justice. But with us, it's relational. So sometimes I'll be talking to somebody that I'm going to maybe rent to, and they'll say, what kind of background check do you do? And I say, mostly what I do is talk to you right now and decide if you're the kind of person that I'm going to be able to trust and we can have a relationship. And so that's typically about as far as we go. I'll call a couple of their references just to see, like, do you know this person? What do you think of them? Would they make a good tenant? And ask them those things, but that's about it. So when I think about business in general, I think about good goods, good work, and good wealth. I want to provide a good good. I want to provide decent housing. I want to provide good work for my workers so that they are dignified and they're enjoying it and they have some freedom. And we'll talk about that as we go along. And then good wealth. What do I do with my money? As I make my money, what am I doing with it? Am I just using it to buy another Ski-Doo? I don't have any Ski-Doos. I'd like to have one Ski-Doo. I don't have any Ski-Doos. But what am I doing with my money? Am I just buying it for myself, buying stuff for myself? Or am I using that to help the common good? This was the first house that I bought in Omaha. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a drug house. And it also has a dogfighting ring in the basement. I didn't know what a dogfighting ring was, so I didn't know how to look for one. But it had a dogfighting ring in the basement. One of my next tenants found out, they're like, there's a dogfighting ring here? I'm like, I didn't know what that was. That's interesting. But that's where I lived, and I was close enough to walk to school. But then eventually somebody wanted to move into my apartment, so I had to buy another house. And I bought this one. And this is a giant house. It's got about 7 bedrooms and 3 baths. And in Omaha, just to rub it in, cost $99,000. And that was 15 years ago, but it was a good deal then. So that was the house then that I still have my office in, and I lived in it until I got married. And then my wife, because she's crazy, didn't want to live with 7 other bachelors. So we had to get another house. But this is the house where I still have my office, and I meet with my guys on the porch. So some of this is an older picture, but most of these guys still work for me. Not Izzy, he's gone now. But so they would come on the porch and we'd talk about different projects for the day and figure it out. Izzy was one of the first guys I met he was living in his truck. behind one of the houses that I bought. And he said, it was November in Nebraska, which is pretty cold. And he said, do you care if I keep living in my truck back here until you fix up the house? And I said, why don't you just live in the house until we fix it up? It's got running water and heat. He's like, well, that seems like a good idea. So he moved in, and then he helped me with things. Though turns out he was a mason, had a lot of skills. We became really dear friends. And Izzy actually worked for me and with me for about 13, 14 years. We provided housing for him and a lot of just sort of safety net for him and helped him in different ways. Got him a couple different trucks when this one ran out. And at the end of his life, he actually got brain cancer, and we had him in our own home in the living room in a hospice care bed for the last couple of weeks of his life. So we got to be very close to him in a lot of different ways. This is just some of the crew that used to do work with me. Richard and Joey over there on the left. They met each other in the park where they were living. And she's Crow tribe and he's Omaha Native tribe. But he was very, very protective of her, and they were great people. So each one of those people has helped me a lot over the years. Just some of the different projects we would work on. If it's too cold outside in the winter, we go inside to the Vic. That's a Victorian. And we have coffee. Sometimes I'll make them something to eat. But that's where we get together and talk about what to do that day. And this is just an old picture. All three of these guys now passed away, but they were good friends, became really important part of my life as we went along. 33rd Street is where we kind of first started doing things. These are just some pictures of before and after pictures. This house was a drug house that the prostitute lived on the left side, and then Mike lived on the other, and some people lived upstairs. And anyway, we turned it around and fixed it up over time. So got a great. It's over time you fix these things up and make them more and more beautiful. This one was a pretty rough one. It'd been abandoned for 4 years. We went in, and it's a sixplex, so it's got 6 bathrooms, and the plumbing had been off for 4 years, but the homeless had kept on going into it and using the toilets. So you can imagine what those toilets were like. But when I brought my guys there, I said, this is not really your fault. Like, this is my fault. So I'm responsible for the toilets today. And they're like, oh, that sounds good. Thank you very much. So I took out all the toilets because I felt like I'm the one who got us in this. Like, I don't pay you enough to take out toilets full of people's crap. Who knows how long it's been sitting there. So I did that. And that, those are the kind of things where we would, I would show them respect, and they gave me respect back for that. Actually, when we pulled up in the backyard of this, I just bought it, came in, Richard was with us, who was Omaha tribe. And as we were driving up, he said, oh, there's like 20 homeless people in the back. And he said, oh, there's my cousin. Hey, there's my brother-in-law. And so he knew these people. And I was like, hey, Richard, do you mind? Like, I can talk to him, but would you mind telling them that, like, we're going to start working on this house? They probably can't stay here anymore. He's like, oh, sure, I'll tell him. So he stood up in the back of the truck like he was a mayor giving a speech or something. He's like, brothers, cousins. He said, I just need you to know my boss he bought this place. We're going to be fixing it up. So you're going to have to find somewhere else. They're like, okay, Richard, okay. And they went. It was good. It was good that I knew Richard so he could help me in that way, right? So making friends with the right people is really what it's all about. And it was like that with Richard too. And they would help me in lots of ways. One time I was trying to cash a check at the little grocery store in our neighborhood. And I was there, and she's like, I don't know who you are. And Izzy was with me. Izzy, who, I told about Izzy. And Izzy said, don't worry, he's okay. And she's like, okay, well, I'll take your check then if Izzy says it's okay. So it's nice to know the right people. This is the kind of thing, though, that Izzy could do. He knew how to do bricks. He didn't know how to do tile, but he could do this once we helped him learn how to do it. This was a cool old project. It's an 8-plex. It'd been abandoned because there'd been a double homicide there. It was empty for 5 years. We went in and fixed it up. And not everyone likes my paint job. I'm Swedish, so that's why it's like that. But anyway. So there's a lot of human relationships in this, right? Tenants, employees, partners, because I own a few properties with other people. My brother-in-law, the guy who's the head of finance and econ, he and I own a couple properties together. Bankers, I get to know my bankers very well. You've probably heard this before, but your banker knows you better than your priest does because he knows all your business. He knows all about your money and where it's all going and where it is. And so my bankers know me very well. Hardware store guys, plumbers, electricians, and even the city inspectors. One time we got done going through an inspection because they have to inspect them if it's been condemned and now they're going to make it habitable. And so he had to go through it. And I said, wow, you're going to approve it. Thank you so much. And he said, what are you thanking me for? We thought we were going to have to bulldoze this and the city would have to pay for it. You've put this whole thing on the payroll again for tax roll. And so we're very grateful to you. So you make these friendships over time. So, the same picture, just in color, sorry. Human maximizing business. So business must first of all be human centric. Then gratuity and reciprocity is an important part of what we do with gift and reception. There's more and higher purposes to the commerce exchange beyond the profit motive. So my question is always, how can we use business to transform culture and society for the good? I want to make money, I have to make money. Otherwise I can't pay my banker and then they'll foreclose on me. So I have to make the money, but how much money do I need to make? That's the question. And can I use some of it to like do good in society and transform things for the better? So oftentimes you'll hear it's nothing personal, it's just a business decision. And you get that, right? I mean, you understand that at some level, but at another level, like every decision that I make with a person is a human decision too, right? And sometimes we forget about that human side. So the economy of communion has a much different vision of business practices and activities. Business is personal. In fact, business is fundamentally a human interaction revolving around meeting human needs and wants, not merely the consumer or customer. Okay, we don't need that last. This is what I like about economy of communion. It's sort of between radical free market capitalism, because I'm a capitalist, I like capitalism, I'm for free private enterprise, but it also, I'm not communist or socialist, but I like the communalism aspect, like it's for the common good. So how can we use private enterprise for the common good? So something in between, right? That's what the economy of communion, I think, helps me to envision. I mean, I was already doing it before I met him, but that's what it helps me to put some words to. Anyway, it's sort of in between those two spheres. And now, by the way, I hope you're going to have questions when we're done too. Please be thinking about stuff. So charity model, there's two ways to really help give money through your business practices. And a lot of students that I have will say, yeah, I want to make a lot of money, and then I'll give some back to Creighton or the church or whatever. I'll give some money back after I make tons and tons of money. And that's one model, the charity model. But there's another way of thinking about how do we help give people opportunities, financial freedom, privilege by the very practice of your business and society. Some of that's intentional, some of it's unintentional. And there's a way in which what we're doing isn't just for charity. I mean, charity is about money, and that's great, but that's only one kind of poverty. I think the more important ones are other kinds of poverty. My guys need money, but they can figure out things even if they don't have money. What's really hard for them is a poverty of community, because they don't have guys. If they hang out, I don't know if you've ever hung out with homeless alcoholics at the park. I have some. And they tell you the same stories over and over because they're so drunk. And you maybe experienced that in other settings where people are really drunk and they tell the same stories over and over. So you understand from that maybe what I'm talking about. But this happens, there's not a lot of community in that situation. And so they just don't have a lot of community. They also don't have any place in society. Before they worked for me, if they would have gone into the local hardware store, the whole hardware store would be like, what the hell are you doing here? Get out of here. You have no business here. But now they walk in and they're like, oh, you work for Andy, don't you? What can I get for you, sir? Oh, I need a hammer. I need some paint. And so now they have a place in society just because they're working for me. So that gives them a certain sort of, it eliminates another kind of poverty, a poverty of community and a poverty of place. And if you don't have a place and you don't have a purpose, then you have an existential poverty. Like, what am I doing here? Like, what is this world even about? And so that's another kind of poverty we kind of help to overcome as we build this community that they're a part of. And then I think there's a sense of spiritual poverty that you overcome too. Because if you don't know what you're doing, you just can't figure out, like, there's no sense to any of this, then it's hard to feel like there's providence, that God exists, that there's anything good going on for you from a higher power. And so that changes as well. So it's not just poverty of money, but it's all these other kinds of poverty as well that we try to help them with. So again, beyond profit, we produce goods or services for society, in interactive exchange and relationship, the basis of human interaction for society from business. Business is a basis of financial well-being for people. Business is a basis of progress and advancement for families, communities, and society. And so all of these things are what come from business. It's not just about profit. It is about profit, but it's much more than that, right? Much more complex. So this is this little chart to think about, like, what we do as entrepreneurs with our business and how it does these things for these different people. So how does it benefit workers? In terms of rent savings, it helps them with money. With workers, financial. Sorry, start at the top. Financial way that it helps tenants is rent savings. Financial for workers is money. Subcontractors, I've given money or loans to guys that work for me. Like one of them bought a farm with his money. Another guy bought a trailer park that he now owns and runs. So helping them in that way. It helps the neighbors financially by propping up their values. Helps society with tax revenue. I'll show you that in a second. Freedom. Tenants don't have to have ownership. If you rent, it's not your toilet problem. It's Andy's toilet problem. So all those toilets, those are my problems. And when you rent, that means it's not your problem. It's my problem. And so that's part of what you get when you have freedom from ownership when you're a renter. To drive or purchase and create and decide, that's freedom my workers get. They get to drive my truck around. They get to purchase stuff, decide what color paint, things like that. And they like that freedom. With my subcontractors, I'm pretty flexible with them. Neighbors, they have a possibility to be more integrated, so we have more diverse neighborhood. They've got all kinds of different people living around them than maybe they'd be used to otherwise. Decent housing for tenants, that's a privilege they get. Work, faithfulness, housing, eating out, social capital. Some of my guys never had eaten out in 3 years before I met them. So just to go to Arby's or Burger King was really fun for them. Subcontractors, there's a safety net privilege that they get. I've helped out those guys when they've had emergencies come up. Neighbors get better houses instead of condemned houses. They have better houses than they did, and they get better neighbors than what was going on there before. So this is societal impact. I've got societal on this side and financial on the next side for the finance guys. We have 28 properties purchased and fixed up in Omaha, primarily in our own Midtown neighborhood, provide quality, low to moderate income housing for people, responsible for about 116 toilets, increase taxable value of properties by 150 to 500%, establish many business relationships, helped a variety of tenants in difficult situations, and we provided income and work for a lot of different people in Midtown. Well, financially, we've invested over $3 million in Midtown, spent over $70,000 per year on labor to employ local tradesmen, over $70,000 per year on materials at local businesses, spent $40,000 per year on public utilities, over $50,000 a year on property taxes, over $25,000 a year in insurance, and over $35,000 on interest to local banks. So that's a lot of different money that just basically my wife and I are providing through this thing that we do on the side for our hobby. So that's financial benefit. So again, but we do make certain decisions that cost us some money. We maybe don't make as much money as we could. Well, our lives are much more messy working with homeless, of course. So the economy community seeks to address financial poverty, goes beyond that, the kinds that we talked about before. This may require us to become poor in our attempt to help the poor. So, you know, we probably spend more money sometimes getting work done, having these guys do it than we would if we just hired it out. So we're trying to overcome indigence. This is a good quote, I think, from the Pope, and I think this is the last quote I've got from him, maybe. But imitating the Good Samaritan of the gospel is not enough. So the Good Samaritan, if you forgot, was a Good Samaritan who helped the guy who was victimized and beat up. Of course, when an entrepreneur or any person happens upon a victim, he or she is called to take care of the victim, and perhaps like the Good Samaritan, also to enlist a fraternal action in the market. But it's important to act above all before the man comes across the robbers, battling the frameworks of sin that produce the robbers and victims. So in other words, we're trying to help solve people from even being homeless so the government doesn't have to help them, right? So we're stepping in with private enterprise and helping to stop some of these problems before these people become victims, so that they don't have to go to the government and get help through that means. So one of the things that will happen, maybe I should go back. But this is Izzy and Jeff, and I love these guys a lot, but they both drive me crazy in lots of ways. And so there's been a lot of times when I've just had it with them. Like I kick Izzy out of his house or out of his apartment for a couple of weeks till he would straighten up and things like that. So you have this, but yet welcome them back in eventually. And so there's this frustration with them because they mess up my plans. I have plans and then they don't show up or they show up drunk or something happens. And so that would be very frustrating to me. But on the other hand, it's been such a blessing to get to know them, which is why I put this book out. So the messiness and wounds of communion. So the wound and the blessing is a book by an Italian economist, and it's about that in business we often try to protect ourselves from getting hurt by having policies in place. So we put in policies that say, sorry, there's nothing I can do. Your credit score is too low for me to rent to you. We just have this policy. I'm sorry. Nothing personal. And so policies are put in place that keep you from getting wounded, But when you keep yourself from getting wounded, you also keep yourself from getting blessed in certain ways that you might have gotten blessed. So in having all these pretty close, intimate relationships with lots of homeless alcoholics, with lots of tenants who maybe normally wouldn't get housing, we end up having pretty messy lives ourselves sometimes. Messiness that we wouldn't have if we just had professional relationships with everyone that worked with us and for us. But that messiness is part of the blessing of our life too. People sometimes say, why don't you just hire a property manager to do all this for you? And I say, then why would I do all this? Like, that's the whole reason that I'm involved in this. I like interacting. I like knowing 100 people in my neighborhood that are my tenants. I like knowing my homeless guys that work for me. I mean, that's part of the joy of all this whole thing. Why would I want to separate myself from that by having this middle person that would take care and deal with all the stuff that happens? So the messiness comes along. If you protect yourself from the messiness, you're also going to protect yourself from the blessings that you can get as well. So just full disclosure, just reasons that I do fail. Like anyone who tries to manage stuff, I fail in lots of ways. I'm a poor communicator. I don't always explain my expectations clearly, and then I get frustrated about it. I provide a bad example in the way I act like a jerk, and then all of a sudden all my guys are acting like jerks to each other that day. I don't think through a strategy to ensure that we're doing it the right way for a long time, or I let the culture slip towards something that I know that we shouldn't be doing. And mostly I take on too much, do more than I should. So that's always a danger for us, I think. Probably a lot of overachievers in this room too. Fail to have accountability. I forget my values, what my values are in the midst of short-term urgent demands. And lastly, I think we all can relate to this. I objectify people and I don't remember what my values are, don't remember their humanity. And that can be a person on the road that I'm just frustrated with, or as I'm going through the checkout line more quickly than I should, I don't look at someone and say, how are you doing today? Glad to see you. And treat them like a human being, right? So this is the last quote from the Pope. First gift of the entrepreneur is of his or her own person. Your money, although important, is too little. Money does not save if it is not accompanied by the gift of the person. This is just a picture of Izzy and I probably about a month before he passed away. So for me, the key spiritual takeaways, if you're into that sort of thing, are look for opportunities to let God use you in the lives of others. Sometimes people will ask me, how many houses are you hoping to buy? I'm like, I didn't hope to buy any, but here we are. So it just sort of happened over time. It wasn't like a big plan. You just kind of see opportunities and take them. And God can use anything you do if you to bless others and build you up spiritually. I mean, who would think that real estate investment could be a means of spiritual fulfillment? But here we are. So there's all kinds of things. If you're willing to put that in the right and with the right mindset, you can develop spiritually even from those kinds of things. It's not necessary to know ahead of time how things will work out. In fact, you can't, right? So you don't need to know all those things ahead of time. Just be willing and just do your best as you go forward. And many times things will bless you back. That's just a short bibliography. That's my wife. See what my wife looks like. She likes to wear those kind of flowery coats and things, but she also likes tools. Her dad gave her all these tools, so she had them spread all over the floor. But I made her put down a sheet so she didn't get grease all over the carpet. So that's all. That's what I have. Oh, maybe there's one more to tell you. No, that's it. Okay, that's it. You don't have to have questions, but if anyone does have a question, I'm happy to answer it. Oh, sure. I have not overseen any of their bank accounts. No, I haven't got. I've had a couple of my workers that I've helped take care of their bank accounts so they wouldn't drink it away, and they asked me to do that, but I haven't been directly involved other than that. So we've maybe opened a joint account with them so they can know that their money is secure, but I haven't done that for tenants. No. Yeah, I mean, rent to own's a big problem. I generally have not gotten into that with my tenants per se, but they certainly sometimes make decisions financially that aren't very smart, and that's part of why they're in a tough position financially. But I generally counsel my students, especially against rent to own companies, but also my tenants. Um, but I've never heard of 25 for life for a stereo system. I've never heard of that. I gotta say, we do things a lot less formal even than that. Basically, Izzy would just get a free place to live. I'd ask him to do some projects, and then I'd give him some money sometimes. So it's very informal. It's a very informal economy that's going on with these relationships. It's mostly making sure they have everything they need, and then working with them that way. So, I mean, it's totally up to them. They sure don't have to. They can walk away if they want. So, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Good. So the question is, how do you determine a fair price for the renter so you can grow the business and still, make it so it's fair for them? And I think, there's a lot of times where I've sometimes kept renters for years and years and years. I have some renters that have been there for 9 or 10 years, and I've never raised their rent because I'm like, you're just solid. If I have you out for 3 months and I have to fix up your place, I'm going to lose anything that I'm going to gain in whatever rent increase. It's going to take me a few years to get that back. I just as soon keep you. So there's a lot of times when I'll just do that. If someone moves out, that's when I usually will raise rents. So I'll say, okay, everyone else's rent here is 5, but they just moved out, so I think we can get 6 for this one now. We probably could get 6 for those, but I'm not going to raise rent on them until they move out. So that's how I tend to do things, to not raise rents on people that are there. If I do it, sometimes me just be moderate. Because in Omaha, I don't know what things are like here, but like rents have almost doubled just in the last few years. And so we used to be kind of under market. Now we're way under market in many respects. But makes me more cautious about who I bring in. But I also have a lot more people that want it because they're like, wow, where am I going to find a deal like this? So that helps us to have people. Then they're pretty loyal too. And generally, if they're paying my rents, they don't like they'll say. One time, a woman asked me, she said, "Why are your rents so low?" And I said, "Well, because if your light bulb goes out, I expect you to change it." She's like, "That seems fair." And so it's like gratuity and reciprocity goes back and forth. I'm giving them a pretty good deal. Some of them really like that I have homeless people help us, and so then they're like, they're willing to flex with us. They're like, I don't know if we'll get to that. I know it's Thursday. I don't know if we'll get there until Monday. And they're like, that's cool. Okay, no problem. So we have almost more of a friend relationship even with our tenants, and that's helpful. That takes a lot of the stress out of the whole business process, and that's worth money, right? So, good question. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, sir. Hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Mhm. Yeah, I get about 5 to 10 texts or phone calls a day from people wanting to buy different properties from me. So yeah, so it's resistance to the gentrification for sure. I know then it'd price out any of my tenants. They wouldn't be able to stay there. And I live in the neighborhood. When I walk to school, I can walk to school from home, and I walk by probably 10 or 12 of these properties on my way to school. So I, it's my neighborhood. I don't want it to change that much. But thanks for that story. That's very interesting that your father did that. We don't have any shotgun checks in Nebraska. I know what they are. I've been down in New Orleans. My nephew lives there, and he bought a shotgun check that turned into a house. Yeah, I'm sure they were. Any other questions? Yeah. Mhm. Um, Occasionally. I mean, the most frightening people are if they're on meth, then they're going to be more frightening, because they're, know what they can do. I mean, those guys, they're on meth. I've seen little guys that are this tall that can carry 2 packs of shingles up a ladder like, like that and they're on meth. So you got to be careful about that. And if they got a weapon, or you don't know if they have a weapon, so you have to be careful. But when I went to school in the Bronx, I spent a lot of time in the Bronx, like walking around and being around people. And that helped me. I grew up on a pig farm in Nebraska. Like I'd never been around scary people. Well, not people that I think are scary. Some people might think they're scary, but they weren't scary to me. Um, and so lived in the Bronx quite a while, and then lived in rough part of Milwaukee when I was there at grad school, and um, lived in a pretty rough part of Minneapolis in my own home. I mean, when my mom and dad came to visit, there were gunshots right outside our door the night they came from. So that was scary. But you just I got used to it. So not very much scares me now, unless someone's on meth. But it can be. But I think part of that's just getting over it, and you only get over it by being around people and experiencing things with other people. You get used to stuff if you learn to be around differences from yourself. So that's the best advice I can give you. I mean, even my first year of college, when I went to college, I was living up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I worked with Teen Challenge, and they work with homeless kids. So I go there every Thursday, and from our spring break of my freshman year, me and 2 other buddies, and this was totally not school condoned, but we decided to go live with the homeless friends that we'd made. So we were living homelessly in Vancouver, sometimes with them in squatter houses and stuff. Probably very dangerous looking back on it now, but we did that, and that helped me get to know what it was like to be with squatter teens anymore. It's a little bit different than we're talking about here, but being in those experiences and putting yourself in those experiences helps you to be more at ease in lots of different kinds of situations. So the more you can do that for yourself, you don't have to pay for any credit hours for that. Just do it. So, good point, though. Thanks. Yes, sir. They found me for the most part. And even Jeff that I showed you there, he was a friend of Blue, one of the guys that was in the other picture. Blue brought him to me, and I'd seen Jeff around, but I'd never met him. And so we're a pretty small community, so you kind of see people sometimes before you know them. Another guy that works for me some is Mick, and he has long hair. He looks like he's from 70s, I don't know, a 70s rock group or something. And Mick's turned out to be very helpful. I mean, but you have to find out like what can you trust people with, and what are they good at, and what are they not really good at, and sort of what they're how dependable they are for what. You have to find that out. But I just find them in my neighborhood, really. I don't import anyone from or have them drive to me for the most part. I've got a couple of women that have cars that I've met who are friends of these guys, and then they do cleaning for me or help with this or that. So different sorts of things. And none of them have drug issues. Like Danny, who works with Danielle, she has lupus. And so she just can't, like there's some days where she can't work for 2 or 3 days in a week. And that's fine with us. We don't, because she's like doing floors. She can take a wood floor and just make it turn into magic. It looks brand new, and she's amazing with it. And she'll say to me, I don't care if you can, like we give her a place to stay. I gave her a car. And she says, I don't care if you pay me at all. I get a little bit from the government every month. And I just love being able to work. I like being able to be creative and show what I can do. And she just loves doing that. And so part of what we give to these tenants or to the workers is not the money so much, it's just like the pride. When I would come home from Creighton, sometimes they would say, did you see what I did? That's their first question, not, hey, can I have some money? Because they want you to see it, because they have pride. They're a human being. They like to do stuff and have people look at it and say, look what I did. What's that? They have a purpose. Yeah, right. He's asked 2 questions. Some of you haven't asked any. Okay. Good. Well, it sure has been fun to be up here with you. And thank you for having me. Hope you have a good rest of your semester. I know it's almost over. So.
Andy, thank you so much. I really appreciate you making the trip, and I think we all thought it was worthwhile. I just can't impress the idea that we can do business and do business well and do good. You know, those are not mutually exclusive things. And as a Bonaventure community, that's a message that we really want to drive home. So thank you so much. Let's give Andy another round of applause. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. It's great to see you.